All right. So we're looking at the second industrial revolution in the United States. Similar to the first, a lot of the business ideas and mechanization and engineering come over from Great Britain. This is a sketch of Bethlehem Steel Works in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in 1881. So obviously, all of this growth, the growth of mechanization, mass production like the mechanical reaper in Chicago, agriculture in the West, the rise of beef, the mining booms, all that productivity, that can't happen without the railroads. So the Transcontinental Railroad was an old government promise to California from 1850. Where did that promise come from? You guys want a hint? Yeah. That's a good guess, but it's earlier than that. 12 years earlier than the Homestead Act, what compromise said to California, we'll build you a railroad as long as you become a free state?
The Great Compromise of 18...
It's just the compromise of 1850. Remember the compromise of 1850? California became a free state. California said, they were leery. Prior to that, California had been its own country, right? 2-year period. The Bear Flag Republic. There are a few things that stalled California coming in. There's a few things that stalled. California came in as a state, but there's a few things that stalled the railroad from being built. The events of Bleeding Kansas as a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and obviously the American Civil War. Lincoln and the Republican-controlled Congress in 1862, they are going to pass the Transcontinental Railroad Act to build the Transcontinental Railroad. It will be built from east to west and west to east. Very simple to remember who built what. From east to west, starts in Omaha, Nebraska, and goes to Utah. That is the Union Pacific. And it was federally funded, and it was led by federal employees, notably a Union general by the name of Grenville Dodge. From west to east, it was more privatized, though the federal government was involved in land subsidies and grants, and that was led by, and it's called the Central Pacific, from Sacramento to Utah, and that one was led by Leland Stanford, the guy that made a fortune off of the grocer business, became governor of California, became really wealthy off the Transcontinental Railroad, and takes some of that wealth and becomes the benefactor for the college that bears his name in Palo Alto, Stanford University. The guy that leads the construction of the Central Pacific is going to be Samuel S. Montague. So people are going to flood out west to build the railroad. People are going to migrate from China, Japan, notably China at this period of time, to work on the railroad in the West. So the majority of those that performed labor, Irish immigrants, Civil War veterans, free African Americans, and Chinese laborers. There are all types of obstacles, right? Continued battles against Native Americans, political corruption, economic corruption like Credit Mobilier scandal. There is problems with lawlessness, problems with workers not following through on the job. problems with workers not being willing to do the job, especially dealing with nitroglycerin and things of that nature. But ultimately, the job is completed, and the golden spike will be laid on May 10th, 1869, with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. Anybody watch Hell on Wheels series on the Transcontinental Railroad? Here we have the Golden Spike Ceremony, Promontory Point, Utah. Samuel Montague, Grenville Dodge, Leland Stanford was the guy that hammered the Golden Spike in. The original Golden Spike is at Stanford University. What group is not being pictured here? The Chinese. The Chinese are left out of the image. They're left out of the picture. So, railroad production grew enormously in the post-Civil War era. 35,000 miles of track at the end of the Civil War. By the turn of the century, over 192,000. Yeah, bless you. Over 192,000 miles of railroad track. As we stated before, Congress is going to have less money and more land as subsidies. And they're going to have these massive land grants. Over 155 million acres of land will be granted for the railroads to build in the Rockies, the Mexican Cession, the war-torn South, and throughout the West Coast. So the railroads are going to sort of create, they make or break territories. You're either going to do really great, your town's going to be on the map, or if the railroad doesn't make it to your town, it becomes a ghost town. And you get sort of this checkerboard type of fashion where the railroad companies start to branch out. The railroad monopolized everything from the value of commodities, produce, the rates of transportation. All aspects of the economy were dominated by the railroad. That's what led Grover Cleveland and Congress to establish the Interstate Commerce Commission, which had a little bit of a bark and very little bite because the railroad just had too much money and too much influence that they could use to bribe politicians and even ICC agents. So this is a pretty significant advancement compared to the last locomotive we saw. This is a locomotive that is connected to Mallory's research. This would have been a locomotive that would have run on a line owned by Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt controlled all the railroad coming in and out of New York. And he went to war with other tycoons to defeat them. Mallory brought up a good point. What really gave him his strength was he controlled everything from Chicago to New York and everything out of New York. In fact, Vanderbilt will build what he believed to be a cathedral of transportation. Did you go to that cathedral when you were up in New York?
Well,
it's not a cathedral for religion, it's a cathedral for transportation. Does anybody want to take a wild guess what it is? What train station? Grand Central Station. I'm surprised you didn't go in there. I guess you guys didn't take a train. All right. Has anybody been in the Grand Central Station? Pretty incredible, huh? Yeah. Yeah.
wait, he made that?
Well, he had it built. He put up the money. All right. As I said before, railroad towns, if you had a successful railroad town, it would boom. If the railroad did not go through your town, it would bust. I am an example of a person that grew up in a railroad town. My ancestor, my great-grandfather, my great-uncles, all my family members a generation back, past my grandfather, they worked on the railroad. My town was a railroad town that moved coal from West Virginia to Richmond. In fact, in my little hometown, Clifton Forge, Virginia, you can visit the Chesapeake and Ohio Historical Society and the Chesapeake and Ohio Rail Heritage Center. It's pretty cool if you're into trains. So, railroad towns were big business because they could move goods and people and commodities through despite where they might be, right? In some cases, these would be rural areas. Obviously, Native Americans are continued to be pushed out by the railroad and pushed to reservations. Advancements on the railroad. Steel rails are replacing iron rails. The Westinghouse air brake improved safety. The Pullman Palace car, developed by railroad tycoon George Pullman, is developed for luxury travel. Refrigerator cars by Armour and Swift to move not only meat but also produce to market. Cattle guards and cattle catchers. You ever seen a cattle catcher? You've all seen it. How many people have ever seen a locomotive with a huge, this massive sort of grate, V-shaped grate on the front of it? All of us. That's what we think when we think of like an old train, right? I'll pull it up for you. That's a cattle. So if you're coming down the track, it takes the cow off its feet and it flies to the side as opposed to wrecking the train. Well, that's how they started doing cattle guards. So cattle guards are, you see these on roads. I don't know though. I grew up around a lot of cattle guards. I don't know if you guys did or have. But a cattle guard would be, let's say you got a farm and your the driveway, any of the roads out of your farm go to the main road. You'll have a cattle guard so the cow's trying to walk out and it just falls into the grate and then you have to pull it out so it doesn't get loose. There's all kinds of cattle guards all over out west, like in Wyoming and Idaho and Montana, because they don't want cattle like wandering out on the interstate, people rolling 80 miles an hour. But yeah, if they get, so that's the thing, they don't, if a gate's left open, they want to make sure that the cows, but this, seriously, like, it was this type of, this V design, it's kind of like this, and it's coming down the track, and there's a cow, boom, off to the side, so it doesn't smash in and destroy the train and potentially derail it.
Oh, like the thing that was in the last one?
Was there one on the front of the last photo? Yeah, there it is, right there. On the bottom left, that's a cattle catcher. By this time, they could go pretty fast, but they were, you're talking anywhere between 30 to 50 miles an hour. But we're not like at that. It increases pretty quickly. Just think of how fast the technology develops. I think by the time you get to World War II, you've got trains that'll move 60 miles an hour or more. I can look that up for you though. My uncle's like real big train enthusiast. He would have that much closer. So when I talk to him, I'll ask him. We'll just take a look and see that. I mean, you can research it now if you like. To kind of go off with, some other things, double tracking. So that seems pretty normal, right? You'd have a track going one way and a track going the other way. Well, there's a big problem when there wasn't double tracking, people colliding, right? Telegraph lines going with the trains, block signals for safety. Train accidents were common, collisions, boiler explosions, but I find that to be like one of the truest. This is what's so Americana about this era. People are willing to risk their lives to get somewhere faster. I think that's so American. You know, it's like, oh, hey, this boiler might explode, but you know what? I'm gonna roll the dice. Kind of goes back to the Wright brothers. You know what? We're gonna get in this plane, see what happens. All right, let's take a look at this guy. That is George Pullman. George Pullman develops these palace cars. They can be your luxury travel cars, but they can also have dining areas, sleeping areas. He is going to produce these outside of Chicago in a company town. You all understand what a company town is?
Is that a town where people in the company live?
It's a town built by the company, and the people that work there live there. Very good, both of you. All right? So imagine we were in a company town, and we are developing cattle catchers. Since we've had fun with that today. And I say, hey guys, we're going to make steel cattle catchers, and you guys move here. I got good housing for you. You're going to make a good wage, and I'm going to take good care of you and your family. When you move here, and you find out real quickly the house that I've provided for you is not good. The wage that I've provided for you is not real money. I'm paying you money that I created. It's called company town money. You also figure out that you can only use your company town money at my company store, and I dictate the price of my goods. Believe it or not, guys, there were laws that allowed for this to take place all the way up to the 1970s. This was a really rough situation, and it wasn't just for train cars, coal mines, glass companies, the railroad itself, you name it, company towns were created. Logging communities. This guy's company town was right outside of Chicago. He cut wages in the late 1800s by 25% in his company town. They rose up. They revolted, and it turned into a bloody strike called the Pullman Company Town Strike. So, by 1900, the railroad is now intertwined and connects east to west. 4 additional transcontinental rail lines will be completed. The Northern Pacific, that connected Lake Superior to the Puget Sound, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, connected the Atlantic to the Pacific Railroad. The Southern Pacific went from New Orleans to San Francisco. What compromise required these to be built? Take a look up here. What compromise required these two to be built?
What year was it?
I'd be giving it away. Very good. Compromise of 1877 required a southern transcontinental rail line. The Great Northern we learned about from Duluth to Seattle. That's the one that destroyed which bank? Not the World Bank, but one of the largest banks in America. J. Cook and Company. J. Cook and Company. And then we have James J. Hill. I don't know what you guys are working on over there, but I'd like for y'all to focus. Okay? I'm sure it's not as important as what I'm trying to do right now. Thank you. So, if you take a look at James J. Hill, he comes out of that thing just fine. And who does he end up with? Business-wise.
Bankruptcy.
No. He ends up with he comes out of this all right. J. Cook and a lot of other investors lose everything because the stock was watered. Anybody know?
Wait,
I'm sure you can take a wild guess. J.P. Morgan. Very good. He and J.P. Morgan end up controlling this rail line. What's up? Oh no, you're good. All right. So here we have James J. Hill. He was in a conglomerate with J.P. Morgan. We'll talk more about that when we talk about Morgan. This is the intertwining of the railroads by 1900. So you can see a number of lines are built here that are going to connect with the transcontinental rail lines, the Northern Pacific, the Union Pacific, the Atlantic and Pacific, the Southern Pacific, and they're all going to make it to the West. This is where I pump the brakes on the lesson for today, the Bessemer process. Henry Bessemer was a bullet maker in England that invented a cheap way to make steel, turn iron into steel. That process was not new, right? Steel, the process of steel mongering goes back to Japan and Western Europe. But to make it fast and cheap, that was revolutionary. So the idea, cold air was blown on red hot iron, it burned the carbon deposits and it purified it. America was in a great position here. We had plenty of coal for the fuel, we had plenty of iron deposits, we had plenty of timber, we had plenty of land and water that are required to make steel. So steel boilers, the idea is they're dangerous, but they achieve really high efficiency by condensing water vapor in the exhaust gases, and then that recovers its latent heat of evaporation, which allows this wonder material to be developed fast and cheap. Again, the boiler technology is not perfect. It is improved with the use of gas and oil. It was highly dangerous because boiler explosions were common. Why does Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish immigrant who was a rags to riches guy, came to America with nothing, made millions of dollars as an industrialist, why does he risk everything to bring the Bessemer process to Pittsburgh? Why Pittsburgh? Yeah.
The steel industry is in Pittsburgh.
He brings the steel industry to Pittsburgh. He is the reason Pittsburgh is the steel city. Why? What all does he have at his disposal? What else? What else? Eventually, he's going to get railroads built out there. Railroads will be built all over the place.
Is it the workers?
Labor will come. If you build it, they will come. To take from the iconic film Field of Dreams. Love that. Love that movie. What does Pittsburgh have going on for it for the steel industry?
Steel?
Very good. It has plenty of iron. They have plenty of coal. They have plenty of land. They have plenty of timber. But what goes through Pittsburgh?
Railroad.
The rivers. What rivers? Does anybody remember what they are? Kind of a tricky question. The Monongahela, Susquehanna, and the Allegheny. What large river is the mouth, the start of the large river just outside of Pittsburgh? Looking for just a shorter word, one of the big rivers we talked about earlier in the year. It is. Very good. It is the Ohio River. Excellent job. Those are all the things you got going on for you. You got all that water, you got all those resources, and what he's going to be able to do is he puts Pittsburgh and the American steel industry on the map. He strongly, and really he risked everything. He was on the brink of failure. One reason why he risked everything during the Panic of 1893. But he makes it through, becomes one of the wealthiest men in the world, and he is also going to sort of be a controversial character. Are we all familiar with Darwin's Origin of Species? Yes. It was published just around this time, just a little bit before this. Darwin talks about survival of the what? The fittest, right? That's Darwinism. Well, in Carnegie, pronounce it either way, in his pamphlet, Wealth, or the Gospel of Wealth, he applies he applies Darwinism to society and capitalism. The idea is Only the strong rise to the top in a democratic capitalist system. If you can't get to the top, then you have to settle for being at the bottom. So this is quite controversial. But he also says the masses are living a better lifestyle for all the advancements that America had developed in this era. The good old times were not the good old times. The good old times were when you made a dress by the hearth, or you made your own gun, or you did your own ironmongering. Now, thanks to assembly lines and interchangeable parts and all of this mechanization, those things can be done for you in mass production, and Americans can live a better life for that. Well, there's some truth to that, but we also know that the wealthiest people are maintaining control of the majority of the wealth. Low wages are part of the strategy. There's another thing that Carnegie could not stand, and that was labor unions. When he was actually out of the country when workers in his homestead factory outside of Pittsburgh rose up in rebellion over their wages being cut and being forced to sign oaths that they would leave their union, which are called yellow dog oaths. The guy that ran his factory, Henry Clay Frick, what do you think Frick did?
Kill him.
How so? If you got a labor uprising, who are you going to call?
The Pink Bandits.
Who said that? The Pinkertons.
I call it Pink Bandits.
That's good. Yeah, you're going to call the Pinkertons. We did that last week. Good job. You're going to call the Pinkertons. They're going to crack some knees. They're going to crack some skulls, right? That's what's going to happen. What's up? Yeah, of course. So Pinkertons are called in to put down the homestead strike. It got ugly. We're going to talk more about that later. Any questions here? I do want to add one quick thing. When Carnegie decides to hang it up, he's going to sell his business for $400 million. To guess who? J.P. Morgan. So J.P. Morgan ends up turning American Steel Corporation, or the U.S. Steel Corporation, into America's first billion-dollar industry with a B in 1901. Much of Carnegie's money will go to philanthropy. He has a college in his honor, or, well, not his honor. A lot of it's funded by his fortune. Carnegie Mellon. Are you all familiar with who the Mellon is? Andrew Mellon, Secretary of Treasury under Coolidge and Hoover. He was from Pittsburgh area, Western PA. Have you guys heard of Carnegie Hall? He put up the money for that, the Performing Hall and Performing Arts Center in New York. Libraries, science centers bear his name for his philanthropy. Here we have Andrew Carnegie on the left, Henry Bessemer on the right, and again, sometimes you'll hear, if you're from Western Pennsylvania, anybody have any Western Pennsylvania family? They would pronounce his name Carnegie. Most folks pronounce it Carnegie. We won't split hairs here. All right. So this is a good place for us to pump the brakes.